Archaeological evidence suggests the human habitation on the Italian peninsula is ancient, dating back to at least 700,000 BC, characterized by early hunter-gatherer societies, of which the later Romans had no historical record. Lacking scientific evidence of these prehistoric origins, the Romans constructed an elaborate mythological framework to establish the genesis of their civilization, eventually settling on the precise date of April 21st, 753 BC, during the reign of Emperor Augustus, as the official founding of Rome. This origin story centers on Romulus, a legendary figure claimed to be a descendant of Aeneas, the Trojan hero who fled the destruction of Troy and settled in the region of Latium. The name of this central Italian region, Latium, serves as the etymological root for Latin, designating both the language spoken by the Romans and the specific tribe to which they belonged. The legend of Romulus remains a cornerstone of Western cultural history, narrating the dramatic life of twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, who were purportedly the sons of Rhea Silvia and Mars, the Roman god of war, thereby attributing divine martial heritage to the city. According to the myth, the infants were abandoned in a basket on the Tiber River to die, but were miraculously discovered and suckled by a she-wolf until they were rescued by a shepherd. Upon reaching adulthood, the brothers resolved to establish a new city near the site of their salvation. However, this endeavor ended in fratricide when Romulus killed Remus during a dispute over who would rule, cementing the grim determination that would characterize Rome's rise to power. In reality, the founding of Rome was a gradual historical process devoid of mythological drama, beginning as a loose federation of modest villages scattered across 7 distinct hills overlooking the Tiber River. These geographical features provided a dual strategic advantage. The hills offered natural defensibility against local raids, while the river provided a navigable route to the sea, facilitating access to foreign markets while keeping the settlement safe from direct coastal piracy. During this early period, the Latins were the primary occupants of the 7 hills, but they were surrounded by a diverse array of neighbors on the central Italian peninsula, including the Sabines, Samnites, Campani, and Volsci. However, the most culturally and politically significant influence came from the Etruscans, a sophisticated civilization centered in Etruria, modern-day Tuscany, to the north. The Etruscans maintained extensive commercial and cultural ties with the Phoenicians and the Greeks, the latter of whom had established colonies in southern Italy by 750 BC. Through this trade network, the Etruscans absorbed and transmitted Greek culture, exporting copper, tin, olive oil, and grain, and using the resulting wealth to build powerful urban leagues that profoundly influenced early Roman development. While the legendary date of 753 BC is symbolic, the archaeological record confirms that significant urbanization occurred around this era, transforming the isolated hilltop villages into a unified entity bound by shared religious pantheons. A critical turning point occurred around 625 BC, when a marshland between the hills was drained to create the Roman Forum, a central public space for commerce, politics, and social gathering. For many historians, the construction of the Forum represents the true coalescence of Rome into a distinct city-state governed by a monarchy. The early Roman kingdom was characterized by a balance of power. The kings did not possess absolute authority, but governed in conjunction with assemblies composed of citizen soldiers and a senate. The Senate, originally a council of elders known as patres, fathers, consisted of the city's wealthiest and most influential aristocrats who advised the monarch. Under this system, Rome began to expand its territory, developing a military structure that combined infantry and cavalry, organized according to the city's 3 major tribes. The military organization of the kingdom laid the groundwork for the future legions. Each of the 3 tribes provided 1,000 infantrymen, subdivided into groups of 100 known as centuries, commanded by a centurion. A full levy of 3,000 soldiers constituted a legion, a term that would become synonymous with Roman power. Military service was inextricably linked to property ownership, with the wealthiest citizens forming the cavalry, *equites*, and the land-owning commoners forming the infantry. Heavily influenced by Greek warfare, the primary infantry unit was the hoplite, a soldier equipped with a spear and round shield, ***, fighting in a tight phalanx formation. This demonstrated an early Roman propensity for adapting effective foreign technologies and tactics to their own superior advantage. According to Roman historical tradition, the monarchy eventually degenerated into tyranny, leading to a popular uprising in 509 BC that expelled the king and established the Roman Republic. This new government was led by two annually elected consuls who shared executive power, checked by the Senate and the Centuriate Assembly. At the dawn of the Republic, Rome was a modest city-state controlling approximately 300 square miles and 40,000 inhabitants, yet it immediately faced existential threats from the Etruscans and the Latin League. Following a hard-fought victory against the Latin League in 499 BC, Rome negotiated a strategic treaty of alliance that positioned it as the dominant partner, entitling Rome to half of all spoils of war and ensuring its growth outpaced its neighbors. Throughout the 5th century BCE, Rome's primary rival was the powerful Etruscan city of Veii, located just 10 miles north on the Tiber River. The conflict was driven by economic competition over control of the river's trade routes and valuable salt beds, a crucial preservative resource in the ancient world. After a protracted struggle spanning decades, Rome finally conquered Veii in 396 BC following a long siege, a victory that nearly doubled Roman territory and signaled its emergence as a major regional power. However, Rome's ascent was brutally interrupted in the 390s BC by the invasion of the Gauls, a Celtic people who had crossed the Alps and displaced the Etruscans in the Po Valley, Cisalpine Gaul. When diplomatic efforts failed, Rome mustered its largest army to date, between 10,000 and 15,000 men, but suffered a catastrophic defeat against the physically imposing and ferocious Gallic warriors. The Gauls proceeded to sack and occupy Rome, besieging the surviving defenders on the Capitoline Hill. The invaders only withdrew after receiving a humiliating ransom of 1,000 pounds of gold and news that their own homelands were under attack, leaving a psychological scar on the Roman consciousness that would last for centuries. Following the traumatic devastation wrought by the Gallic invasion, Rome demonstrated remarkable resilience, rebuilding its city and rapidly re-emerging as the preeminent power in central Italy. However, this resurgence provoked anxiety among neighboring states, precipitating a new cycle of conflict known as the First Samnite War in 343 BC, fought against the Samnites, a rugged confederation of tribes from the mountainous southeast. Although Rome secured a victory 2 years later, political necessity turned former enemies into allies. Rome and the Samnites temporarily joined forces to suppress a rebellion by the Latin League, a collection of neighboring city-states that shared Rome's culture and language but resented its growing hegemony. This conflict, known as the Latin War, concluded in 338 BC with a decisive Roman triumph that fundamentally altered the political landscape of Italy. The settlement of 338 BC marked a turning point in Roman statecraft, as the Latin League was permanently dissolved and Rome established itself as the unquestioned master of Latium. Rather than simply annexing all territory, Rome implemented a sophisticated system of control. While some Latin lands were directly absorbed, other defeated communities retained their local independence, but were contractually bound to supply troops to the Roman army upon command. To further secure its hold on the region, Rome established a network of colonies that functioned as strategic outposts. These were divided into two categories: Latin colonies, where settlers accepted land in exchange for forfeiting their full Roman citizenship while retaining local rights, and Roman colonies, which were typically coastal military garrisons where settlers retained full citizenship. Through this complex web of treaties and settlements, Rome expanded its influence not just by force, but by integrating neighbors into a Roman-led confederation. Rome's relentless expansion inevitably reignited tensions with the Samnites, leading to a protracted struggle for dominance over the Italian peninsula. The Second Samnite War erupted around 327 BC over a political dispute in the Greek city of Naples. This grueling conflict lasted over 20 years and ended in an inconclusive stalemate, proving the Samnites to be Rome's most tenacious rivals. Hostilities resumed with the Third Samnite War in 298 BC, a high-stakes conflict where the Samnites forged a massive anti-Roman coalition by recruiting the Etruscans and the Gauls to their cause. Despite the formidable size of this alliance, Rome and its loyal allies achieved a crushing victory, effectively breaking Samnite resistance by 290 BC. Within the subsequent 2 decades, Rome systematically dismantled the remaining power of the Etruscans and Gauls, securing absolute control over central Italy. As Roman hegemony pushed southward, the Republic came into direct conflict with Magna Graecia, the coastal area of southern Italy colonized by Greeks, specifically the wealthy city of Tarentum, modern Taranto. Threatened by Rome's alliances with smaller Greek cities, Tarentum sought aid from King Pyrrhus of Epirus, a brilliant general and cousin of Alexander the Great. In 280 BC, Pyrrhus invaded Italy with a professional army and war elephants, winning several initial battles against the Roman legions. However, the Romans inflicted such catastrophic casualties on his forces that Pyrrhus famously remarked that another such victory would utterly undo him, giving rise to the term Pyrrhic victory. Unable to sustain a war of attrition against Rome's inexhaustible manpower, Pyrrhus was eventually driven from the peninsula, and Tarentum fell, leaving Rome in control of nearly all of Italy south of the Po Valley. The emergence of Rome as a superpower was defined by a unique blend of brutal militarism and pragmatic diplomacy. While the legions were capable of ruthless violence, massacring civilians and enslaving thousands, a standard practice of the ancient world, the Roman state also displayed a genius for assimilation. By extending varying degrees of citizenship and allowing defeated cities to retain self-governance in exchange for loyalty and troops, Rome transformed conquered enemies into stakeholders in the Republic's success. This system created a deep reservoir of manpower and financial resources that other ancient states could not match, while simultaneously making Roman rule appear more stable and desirable than subjection to other regional powers. This unification of the Italian peninsula created a massive, protected economic zone and a military recruiting ground that laid the foundation for future Mediterranean conquest. Parallel to its political expansion, the Republic revolutionized military infrastructure through the construction of the first great Roman roads. Designed primarily to facilitate the rapid deployment of legions regardless of weather conditions, these engineering marvels were layered with stones, pebbles, and gravel, and cambered in the center to ensure drainage. The most famous of these, the Via Appia, Appian Way, was commissioned in 312 BC by the censor Appius Claudius Caecus to connect Rome to Capua. These all-weather highways provided a decisive strategic advantage, allowing Roman armies to outmaneuver opponents who would be bogged down in mud, while secondarily serving as vital arteries for commerce and civilian travel that knitted the Italian economy together. The Roman military machine also evolved rapidly during this period, proving to be highly adaptive by borrowing weaponry and tactics from their adversaries. The grueling experience of the Samnite Wars and rugged terrain forced the Romans to abandon the rigid Greek-style phalanx in favor of the more flexible manipular formation, and they adopted the pilum, javelin, and the large scutum, shield, from their mountain-dwelling foes. This constant state of warfare transformed the Roman army into a disciplined, professional-grade force, even though it remained a militia of citizen soldiers fighting for their homeland. Their effectiveness was further bolstered by a deep religious conviction that their expansion was divinely sanctioned, instilling a high degree of morale and cohesion in the ranks. Historians also attribute Rome's ascent to a combination of favorable geography and historical fortune. Situated centrally on the Italian peninsula, Rome enjoyed the strategic advantage of interior lines, allowing it to rapidly shift forces to confront threats from the north, south, or east, while its fertile volcanic soil ensured a steady food supply for a growing population. Conversely, Rome's enemies often lacked this geographic cohesion and failed to unite effectively. The Etruscans, for instance, were a loose league of city-states that frequently squabbled rather than presenting a unified front. Furthermore, sheer luck played a role, such as the Gauls' decision to withdraw from Rome in 390 BC due to external pressures rather than military defeat, a historical accident that saved the young republic from total annihilation and allowed it to survive to conquer the world. In 264 BCE, the Roman Republic initiated the first of three titanic struggles known as the Punic Wars against Carthage, marking its first major conflict with an overseas superpower. At this time, Carthage was the dominant maritime force in the Western Mediterranean, controlling a vast empire that stretched across the North African coast and included the strategic islands of Sardinia and Corsica, as well as significant portions of the Iberian Peninsula and Sicily. Like the Romans, the Carthaginians possessed a sophisticated, Hellenized culture, yet their power was derived primarily from their immense mercantile wealth and a premier navy that commanded the seas. Although Rome and Carthage had maintained a diplomatic relationship based on peaceful trade treaties dating back to 508 BC, a local political dispute in the Sicilian city of Messana, modern-day Messina, shattered this peace. When a group of Sicilian mercenaries in Messana appealed to Rome for military aid against Carthaginian aggression, Rome intervened, fearing that Carthage's encroachment so close to the Italian coast threatened the security of its southern Greek allies. The conflict quickly escalated into a full-scale war for control of Sicily, forcing Rome to adapt its military strategy fundamentally. While Rome possessed a superior army, it lacked a navy capable of challenging the Carthaginian fleet. With remarkable speed and engineering prowess, the Romans constructed a massive fleet from scratch, introducing a revolutionary tactical innovation known as the corvus, a boarding bridge equipped with a heavy spike. This device allowed Roman ships to latch onto enemy vessels, effectively transforming naval engagements into hand-to-hand land battles, where Roman legionaries excelled. This tactic of using marines to board and capture ships changed the nature of naval warfare for the next 2 millennia, allowing Rome to neutralize Carthage's seamanship advantages. The war expanded beyond Sicily when Rome launched an ambitious invasion of North Africa in 256 BC, hoping to strike directly at the Carthaginian heartland. However, following a disastrous defeat, the Roman expeditionary force was forced to withdraw, and the conflict settled back into a grueling war of attrition on Sicily. The hostilities dragged on for another 15 years until 241 BC, when a thoroughly exhausted Carthage finally capitulated, ceding control of Sicily to Rome and agreeing to harsh treaty terms, including a ban on sailing warships in Roman waters and a prohibition on recruiting mercenaries from Italy. This hard-won victory came at a staggering cost of tens of thousands of Roman lives, but it severely diminished Carthage's naval supremacy and established Rome's first overseas province. Shortly thereafter, Rome capitalized on its momentum to annex Sardinia and Corsica, further expanding its nascent empire. Although the Carthaginian threat was temporarily quelled, Rome faced immediate challenges on its northern and eastern frontiers during the interwar period. In the 220s BCE, the Republic launched campaigns against the Kingdom of Illyria across the Adriatic Sea to suppress piracy that threatened Roman trade. While Rome established a foothold and protectorates in the region, Illyrian piracy would remain a persistent nuisance for nearly 2 centuries. Simultaneously, Rome faced a renewed existential threat from the north as Gallic tribes mobilized and marched southward into Roman territory. Demonstrating its growing military capacity, Rome not only repelled this invasion, but launched a counteroffensive, pushing north into the Po Valley and subjugating various Gallic tribes, thereby securing the northern borders of the Aetolian Peninsula. As Rome consolidated its power in Italy, Carthage began to recover its economic and military strength by expanding its colonial holdings on the Iberian Peninsula, modern-day Spain and Portugal, setting the stage for the Second Punic War. The catalyst for this renewed conflict occurred in 219 BC when Hannibal Barca, 247 to 182 BC, a brilliant Carthaginian general, besieged and captured the city of Saguntum, a Roman ally in Spain. When the Roman Senate demanded that Carthage surrender Hannibal to face punishment for this aggression, the Carthaginian government refused, leading to a declaration of war. Hannibal was driven by a deep-seated animosity toward Rome, having sworn a blood oath to his father, Hamilcar Barca, a veteran commander of the First Punic War, that he would never be a friend to the Roman people. In a legendary feat of military logistics, Hannibal assembled a massive army comprising Carthaginians, Spanish infantry, and war elephants, marching them overland from Iberia, through southern Gaul, and across the treacherous, snow-covered Alps into Italy. This audacious maneuver caught the Romans off guard, and Hannibal's forces, bolstered by Gallic allies, won a series of devastating victories on Italian soil. As the Roman historian Livy recounted, the invasion brought ruin to the countryside, noting that the loveliest part of Italy was being reduced to ashes and the smoke was rising everywhere from the burning farms. The nadir of Roman fortunes came in 216 BC at the Battle of Cannae, where Hannibal annihilated a massive Roman army in one of the deadliest days in military history, subsequently leading to the defection of key cities like Tarentum. Despite these catastrophic defeats, Rome possessed a critical strategic advantage. Fighting on its home territory allowed it to draw upon vast reserves of manpower and supplies, whereas Hannibal was isolated, lacking a navy to transport reinforcements from Carthage or Spain. Forced to live off the land, Hannibal could not deliver a knockout blow to the city of Rome itself. Meanwhile, the Romans adopted a multi-front strategy, slowly grinding down Hannibal's forces in Italy while simultaneously launching an offensive in Spain to cut off his supply lines. The young Roman general Publius Cornelius Scipio, 236 to 183 BC, eventually drove the Carthaginians out of the Iberian Peninsula and, in 204 BC, boldly invaded North Africa. This move forced Hannibal to abandon his Italian campaign and return home to defend Carthage. The two great generals finally met at the Battle of Zama in modern-day Tunisia in 202 BC, where Scipio decisively defeated Hannibal. In recognition of his victory, Scipio was awarded the agnomen Africanus, and Rome emerged from the war in possession of Carthage's Spanish territories and as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. Following the conclusion of the Second Punic War, the Roman Republic began to shift its geopolitical focus eastward, bringing it into direct contact and conflict with the sophisticated Greek kingdoms that had emerged from the fractured empire of Alexander the Great. Alexander's vast conquests had dissolved into a collection of independent city-states and three dominant dynastic powers: the Antigonids, who maintained a military stronghold in Macedonia; the Seleucids, who governed a massive territory stretching across the Middle East from their capital in Syria; and the Ptolemies, who ruled over the wealth and grain of Egypt. In addition to these major powers, the Attalid dynasty controlled the strategic kingdom of Pergamum in Asia Minor, modern-day Western Turkey, a region geographically defined as a peninsula bordered by the Black and Mediterranean Seas. The political landscape of the Hellenistic world was volatile, characterized by shifting alliances and rivalries as various monarchs sought to expand their influence at the expense of their neighbors, creating an unstable environment that inevitably drew Rome in to protect its burgeoning interests in the Eastern Mediterranean. Rome's entanglement in Greek affairs actually began while it was still locked in a desperate struggle with Carthage, driven by the aggressive maneuvers of King Philip V of Macedonia, 237 to 179 BC, who had dared to protect a Greek ruler challenging Roman authority in 219 BC. In response to this provocation, Rome dispatched a naval force to harass Macedonian allies and military installations, but the situation escalated significantly 4 years later when Philip signed a formal treaty with Hannibal, Rome's greatest enemy. To counter this threat without diverting too many legions from the Punic War, Rome astutely formed alliances with smaller Greek states, effectively fighting a proxy war, known as the First Macedonian War, against Philip while simultaneously battling Hannibal in Italy. However, As the threat from Carthage subsided, Philip V attempted to aggressively expand his dominance over the Aegean Sea and its surrounding territories. Consequently, in 200 BC, Rome formally declared war on Macedonia, justified by a need to defend its Greek allies, halt Macedonian aggression, and exact retribution for Philip's earlier treacherous alliance with Hannibal. Once the Romans had decisively defeated the Macedonians in 197 BC, their attention turned to the Seleucid Empire, which was attempting to capitalize on the power vacuum under the ambitious leadership of King Antiochus III, 242 to 187 BC. Antiochus sought to expand his territory into Europe, prompting Rome, supported by a coalition of Greek allies, to confront and ultimately defeat him in 190 BC. Although Roman legions campaigned extensively across Greece and Asia Minor, the Senate initially chose not to annex these lands directly. Instead, they preferred to establish a hegemony where Greek communities remained nominally independent but were expected to strictly obey Roman directives. This period of conflict brought immense wealth in the form of spoils and enslaved people back to Italy, solidifying Rome's status as the undisputed superpower of the region and instilling a deep fear in smaller states regarding Rome's overwhelming military capabilities. Despite the clear superiority of Roman arms, the Kingdom of Macedonia foolishly challenged Roman authority one final time, leading to another conflict that ended in a crushing Roman victory in 168 BC following the Battle of Pydna. The aftermath of this war was severe and historic. Rome abolished the ancient Antigonid dynasty and dismantled the kingdom, partitioning Macedonia into four separate, powerless republics, marking the first time Rome completely destroyed one of the three great successor kingdoms of Alexander the Great. Yet, in a profound cultural paradox, even as Rome dismantled Greek political power, the Romans themselves became increasingly captivated by Greek culture, continuing to embrace Hellenism in art, philosophy, and literature despite their military dominance over the Greeks. Throughout the 2nd century BC, Rome found itself in a state of near-perpetual warfare. For while they were managing affairs in the Greek East, they were simultaneously fighting grueling campaigns to secure the Iberian Peninsula and subdue Gallic tribes in northern Italy. In these Western theaters, the nature of conquest was fundamentally different from the East. Unlike the Greeks, who had established bureaucracies and social systems that Rome could manipulate or influence, the Western tribes lacked centralized political structures. Consequently, to preserve their military gains and ensure stability, the Romans could not simply defeat an army and leave. They were forced to station permanent troops, annex territory directly, and construct their own political and administrative systems from the ground up. In the northern reaches of the Italian peninsula, the Roman conquest resulted in the total destruction of certain Gallic tribes, while the survivors were absorbed into the expanding republic, aided by the establishment of Roman colonies similar to those planted earlier in southern Italy. However, the pacification of the Iberian Peninsula proved to be a far more difficult and protracted endeavor, largely due to the fierce resistance of local groups like the Celtiberians, a distinct cultural mix of Celtic settlers and native Iberian peoples. These tribes avoided large-scale pitched battles, favoring what is now known as guerrilla warfare, striking Roman columns with small, mobile groups before vanishing into the rugged mountains or countryside. It took Rome more than 70 years of brutal fighting to assert dominance over these native peoples, culminating in a major victory in 133 BC. The fall of Numantia, though total control of the peninsula would still require several more decades of effort. Amidst these expansions, Rome was drawn into one final, tragic conflict with its old nemesis, Carthage, which had managed to stage a remarkable economic recovery during the 2nd century BC despite being stripped of its empire. While Carthage was once again a major trading hub, it was militarily impotent and unable to defend itself against the aggression of the neighboring African kingdom of Numidia, a Roman ally that frequently seized Carthaginian territory with impunity. Around 150 BC, pushed to the breaking point, the Carthaginians finally retaliated militarily against the Numidians, a desperate action that technically violated the peace treaty they held with Rome, giving the Numidians a pretext to appeal to the Roman Senate for intervention. In Rome, the anti-Carthaginian faction was led by the influential and stern censor Cato the Elder, 234 to 149 BC, a veteran of the Second Punic War who harbored a lifelong hatred for the rival city. For years, Cato had concluded every speech in the Senate, regardless of the topic, with the infamous phrase "Carthage must be destroyed," relentlessly driving the political will of Rome toward a final confrontation. Cato successfully spearheaded the push for war, arguing that a resurgent Carthage, however demilitarized, remained an existential threat to Roman supremacy that had to be eliminated once and for all. This time, however, the Carthaginians possessed neither the resources nor the will to fight a prolonged war against the might of Rome, and realizing the hopelessness of their situation, they offered to surrender immediately and accepted Rome's initial harsh terms. However, the Romans then delivered a final, non-negotiable demand. The entire city of Carthage had to be abandoned and moved inland, a death sentence for a society whose entire existence and economy depended on maritime trade. Faced with the obliteration of their way of life, the Carthaginians refused and mounted a desperate, suicidal resistance known as the Third Punic War. When the conflict finally ended in 146 BC, the Romans fulfilled Cato's grim wish by completely destroying the ancient city, razing it to the ground, and annexing the territory as the new Roman province of Africa. Only a few decades after the destruction of Carthage, Rome found itself embroiled in a significant conflict with its former ally, Numidia, a kingdom that had previously supported Roman interests during the Punic Wars. The trouble began in 112 BC when Jugurtha, the adopted son of the Numidian king, seized the throne by eliminating his rivals with the corrupt assistance of certain Roman senators. This usurpation led to a civil war that severely disrupted the supply of grain to Rome, prompting a public outcry for military intervention to restore order and secure the Republic's food source. Initially, the war went poorly for the Romans, as Jugurtha managed to win several engagements against ineffective Roman leadership. The tide turned in 107 BC with the rise of Gaius Marius, a new man in politics who revolutionized the Roman military machine. To fill the ranks for his campaign against Jugurtha, Marius broke with tradition by recruiting landless peasants and volunteers, rather than relying solely on property-owning citizens. This created a professional army of soldiers who carried standardized equipment, including a javelin, sword, and shield, and who felt a fierce personal loyalty to their general rather than to the abstract state, a shift that would have profound political consequences. Marius defeated Jugurtha in 105 BC, leading to the king's execution by strangulation, and established a dangerous precedent where charismatic generals could use loyal private armies to advance their own political careers. Following the Numidian conflict, Rome enjoyed a brief period of peace that was shattered by the Social War, a rebellion by Rome's Italian allies who demanded full citizenship rights. Although Rome militarily suppressed the uprising, the Republic ultimately conceded and granted citizenship to the Italians to ensure future stability. Immediately after this domestic crisis, Rome faced a severe threat in the east from King Mithridates VI of Pontus, who had conquered Roman allies in Asia Minor and orchestrated the massacre of Roman citizens in the region. The question of who would lead the army against Mithridates ignited a fierce rivalry between the aging Marius and his former subordinate, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. This conflict represented a broader ideological split in Rome between the populares, like Marius, who sought support from the common people, and the optimates, like Sulla, who championed the traditional power of the Senate and the wealthy elite. In 88 BCE, after the Senate appointed Sulla to the command, Marius used political maneuvering to strip him of the title. In a historic and unprecedented move, Sulla refused to step down and instead marched his legions on Rome itself, sparking the first civil war in the history of the Republic. Sulla temporarily seized control, weakened the power of the tribunes, and then departed to fight Mithridates, but his absence allowed his enemies to regroup. Lucius Cornelius Cinna and Marius returned to Rome, violently purging Sulla's supporters and establishing a dictatorship, though Marius died shortly thereafter, and Cinna was eventually killed in a mutiny in 84 BC. After concluding his campaign against Mithridates in 85 BC, Sulla returned to Italy, fighting his way back to the capital against government armies. By 82 BC, Sulla had reconquered Rome and was named dictator for life, unleashing a brutal wave of proscriptions where thousands of his political enemies were tortured and executed. He implemented a series of reactionary reforms designed to cement the power of the Senate and the wealthy while crippling the tribunes and the plebeian assemblies. Although he eventually retired and died in 78 BC, Sulla's legacy was one of extreme divisiveness. As the historian Plutarch noted, Sulla had inflicted more damage on Rome than all of its foreign enemies combined, leaving behind a fractured republic ripe for future civil strife. In the power vacuum following Sulla's death, a new generation of ambitious generals emerged, eventually coalescing into an informal alliance known as the First Triumvirate, consisting of Pompey the Great, Crassus, and Julius Caesar. While these men initially cooperated to bypass the Senate and achieve their personal ambitions, their relationship was fundamentally competitive. Pompey gained fame through campaigns in Iberia, the final defeat of Mithridates, and the suppression of a massive slave rebellion alongside Crassus. Meanwhile, Julius Caesar built his reputation and wealth during a 9-year governorship in Gaul, where he conquered vast territories in modern-day France, crossed the Rhine to fight Germanic tribes, and launched the first Roman incursions into the British Isles. These military successes made Caesar the most powerful and popular figure in Rome, a reality that deeply unsettled his rivals. As the triumvirate dissolved, the competition between Caesar and Pompey escalated into open hostility, setting the stage for yet another civil war. In 49 BC, asserting his strength and refusing to lay down his command, Caesar returned to Rome, effectively declaring war on the Senate and Pompey. He quickly garnered popular support by issuing orders to cancel debts, alleviating the economic chaos caused by decades of internal conflict. The ensuing civil war spanned the Mediterranean, with battles fought in Iberia and the Adriatic, culminating in the decisive Battle of Pharsalus in Greece in 48 BC, where Caesar crushed Pompey's forces. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking sanctuary with the boy king Ptolemy XIII and his sister Cleopatra VII. But the Egyptian rulers, hoping to curry favor with the victor, had Pompey assassinated. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria and was presented with the severed head of his great rival, he famously wept. Rather than celebrating, he mourned the loss of a fellow Roman. Caesar then entangled himself in Egyptian dynastic politics, initiating a famous romance with Cleopatra and using military force to secure her throne and assert Roman dominance over the wealthy nation. Following a lightning-fast campaign to subdue rebellions in the East, after which he coined the phrase Veni, Vidi, Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered, Caesar returned to Rome as the undisputed master of the Mediterranean. Upon his return in 46 BC, Caesar was hailed as a hero and granted unprecedented powers, eventually being named dictator for life. Although he refused the title of king, he effectively functioned as Rome's first emperor, bringing an end to the 500-year-old democratic experiment of the Republic. For many war-weary Romans, the loss of political freedom was a price worth paying for the stability that one-man rule promised after years of chaos. Caesar used his absolute power to enact sweeping reforms. He extended Roman citizenship to provincials, integrated the Italian peninsula more fully into the state, and established colonies abroad in places like Seville, Arles, and Geneva to provide land for his veterans and the urban poor. These actions not only relieved population pressure in Rome, but also spread Roman culture and law throughout the provinces. Under Caesar, Rome began its transformation from a city-state republic into a true international empire, a political evolution that would be formally completed in the years following his assassination.